Hello and welcome to the next episode of Chapter 2 and Subchapter 2. It's called All the Best Feeny. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel because that helps growing and helping your interest if you're interested in listening for the next chapters. It was a long operation. In the preliminary consultation at Manchester University Hospital, the surgeon had already pointed out that they would be operating for several hours. So she would have to expect a few days in hospital afterwards. Perhaps only a short time in intensive care if everything went well. However, they would only know anything about the cancer more precise once the abdomen had been opened. And the team will certainly prepare for the findings based on the blood tests, the ultrasound and the CT images, but only a real look into the open abdomen and palpation of the foci can provide more detailed information, I'm sorry. Even though this explanatory talk was a little unsettling for Feeny and René, the surgeon's openness and professionalism radiated confidence. He had probably already been waiting for Feeny to ask what the prognosis was. He tilted his head and was again crystal clear, frighteningly clear. If you've researched it on the internet, he began, you will have read about a survival rate of 1 to 2 years for ovarian cancer. But that's outdated data. If we detect this cancer at an early stage, you have a chance of growing old with this cancer, perhaps even very old. There are also women in whom this cancer didn't return. Unfortunately, however, most of the findings show at a later stage. According to the preliminary examinations, you will probably have to expect that at least the ovaries will be removed, so you will no longer be able to conceive children. And be prepared for symptoms that indicate an early menopause soon after surgery. Feeny had not dared to ask the question about the stage, so René tried to follow up. The surgeon shook his head. We don't know that yet. Come to my consultation as soon as your wife has recovered from the operation. My secretary will offer you an appointment. And yet he took another breath when he saw the empty eyes of his two counterparts. From my experience, I can tell you that the first operation is of paramount importance. That's why we've got the big team. That's why you're in the right place. If nothing goes wrong, you'll have years to live. And turning to Feeny, and then turning his head also to René, you'll be together for a long time, perhaps 10 years. He concluded his encouragement with a figure that rather frightened Feeny and René. Despite the much shorter years that had been circulating on the internet and that had been weighing on them since the diagnosis. They left the surgeon's office, hugged each other, stepped out on the street. Where are we going? Come on, let's go to a cafe, said René. Feeny nodded. She was lost in herself, yet with a firm gaze. Yes, first I have to get through the operation, and then we'll see. But it's not until the day after tomorrow, and I don't have to go to the clinic to prepare until tomorrow morning. We would better have a coffee together today, and we'll have to catch the train soon because the children have to be picked up from school. The two looked for a nice cafe near the clinic, which was in the city center. There was a medical museum just around the corner, which had a cozy dining room serving organic pastries and cakes. It was to become one of the places to go for the next few months. Will I survive the operation? René remained silent. How should he answer the question? I'm asking because since the examination, I've been feeling this pressure in my abdomen that I hadn't noticed before, or hardly noticed at all. Feeny grabbed her stomach with both hands and showed Renee the area she was referring to. If the tumor is already as big as I can feel it, how am I supposed to get out of it alive? They both poked at her coffee, even though they had no sugar and no milk in it. There were questions that only prompted more questions and didn't allow for any answers. How? What can I say to your questions? I'm as at a loss as you are. When I think about everything that has befallen you in the last few days and weeks, what you, the children, and I have been confronted with, how can you not desperately ask if that's it? In fact, said Feeny, I wonder if that was my life, just cut off by decades, over, over. And why do others go on living? You think of me, of the children, and the brutality of having your future taken away from you, the injustice of us staying while you have to leave? No, I don't feel it's unfair that I've been hit and not one of you. Don't get me wrong. Despite all the pain, I'm comforted by the fact that not one of the children, not you, is still, I would rather have to go through this illness. I think of the many who smoke, who don't care about what they eat, don't exercise, don't take care of their lives but grow stone old. While I think that I've done a lot, have eaten healthily, exercised, that I love this life and yet I'm torn out in the middle. How can this be understood? Maybe I shouldn't have worked so much, not with two children, a husband, building up a fashion business, running the massage parlor, and everything else. Do I have ovarian cancer because I get what I deserve? You doubt everything that was and is important to you, everything that defines you. Exactly, because it affects everything I am. If I'm no longer here tomorrow, I had sent the first CT scans of your tumor to a former school friend who was a radiologist to get his view. You haven't even told me about that. There has never been a good opportunity for us to sit together like this and reflect. It's okay. Excuse me if I let myself go like this. I feel differently. I'm glad that you're opening up and letting me take part in what's going on inside you. What did your school friend mean? Feeny asked skeptically. He said, we didn't have an easy road ahead of us. At the same time, he probably had an idea of what you might blame yourself for, and from his experience, he explained to me, there are causes that, such as unhealthy lifestyles, that can promote cancer. But you mustn't forget that cancer is a systemic disease. What does it mean? I asked him the same question. He put his answer into an example and said, if you play the lottery and choose 6 numbers, you know that exactly 6 numbers will fall into the bins at the weekend when the draw takes place. There are 6 in the pot, but there is no reason at all as to which 6 there are. There's no precondition other than that there are 49 balls in the drum, and in the end, 6 have fallen out in the boxes. If you could calculate which ones, that would be the end of the lottery. Life and cancer behave a bit like this. If you take away all the negative preconditions that make cancer more likely, life and cancer behave like the lottery. Even if there were no negative preconditions whatsoever, several thousand women will develop ovarian cancer every year. It's part of the bitterness of the system of life. Feeny mused. Maybe that would mean I wouldn't have to dig into my past to find out why. But as torturous as this search is, your friend's example is even crueler because it robs me of any ability or power of my own over my disease. Fate is even more terrible than having a guilty conscience. Renee was only allowed to visit Feeny in hospital 2 days after her surgery. The children were not allowed in the intensive care unit at all, but waited anxiously outside in the corridor because they wanted to be closer to their mum. Feeny wanted to speak to Renee straight away, so she was delighted when the door opened and he approached her bed. Even though the words did not come easily to her still swollen lips, she was slightly numb, struggled to sit halfway upright, and stretching and rearing up towards him, she breathed, "I'm alive. Everything went well. That's what the ward says." Renee stepped close to her, gave her a kiss, stroked her cheeks, and whispered, "Feeny, you're already awake? I'm so glad that I can be with you. Jan and Lena are outside. They say hello to you and would have loved to join you here." Feeny responded with her fine lips to indicate that she understood him, and a small glow came over her face when he spoke of the children, even though she could barely open her mouth. "I can only stay for a few minutes," says the nurse, "and of course the children want to know how you are doing." He sat down on the edge of the bed and felt for her. "You don't have to say anything. Don't make an effort. Just let me hold your hand." He tried to stop her effort because he could see how hard she was trying. Somewhat relieved, she let herself sink back into her pillow, and soon her lips were relaxed. He felt her warm hand, which meant everything to him. Minutes passed. The curtain around her bed was pushed aside, and the nurse asked him to give his wife rest for the day and leave her. Feeny was asleep. When he released his hand from hers, he gave her another gentle squeeze, blew her a kiss, and went outside. Alina immediately jumped up, ran towards him, and asked, "How's Mum doing? How is she?" Jan also looked, with a big questioning look. "She's still a bit tired, but the operation went well. She recognized me and we were able to exchange a few words. The nurse told me that she would probably be allowed to go to the normal ward tomorrow, where also you can visit Mum there with me." Both children, although anxious and unsure, were visibly relieved. They could hardly bear to wait for tomorrow. They were more excited than before any Christmas Eve. The next day was rather sobering. In bed was Feeny. She was still exhausted, even though Renee was able to exchange a few more words with her. She had been pleased when he entered her room with the children. Feeny shared the room with 3 other women. The beds were only separated by a curtain. So she gave the entrance a wave to attract their attention. And even though Renee had driven the children to the hospital in the car with mixed feelings, Feeny's obvious joy about the children and him initially swept any worries from his mind. "Can we touch Mum's hand and stroke her?" asked Alina. "Please come," replied Feeny, her voice still hushed and quiet. The big one was beaming. He approached Feeny from one side, Alina from the other. They would have liked to get very close to her, but Dad slowed them down. "Be careful, Mum. This is still her bandage." Feeny looked at him critically. "Don't scare them." he heard Feeny say, but then she added herself, "That's right. You just have to be a bit careful with my tummy. My head and hands are fine." Jan laid his head on her arm. Alina had a few tears of happiness on her cheeks. She had been so afraid that she would never be able to see Mum again. Jan had understood better what it meant to be operated on. René was also a little relieved to be able to visit her on the normal ward again so quickly and to see that she looked much better than the day before, with some color in her face again. She asked the children how it was at school, apologizing that she was still tired. And indeed, she soon fell back into her pillow. René explained to the children that they had better leave Mum alone again and let her rest. The three of them said good night to her, caressing her arms and cheeks lovingly. René made appointments with the class teachers at the two schools the children attended. He tried to explain the new home situation to them without going into all the details of the diagnosis, and he was met with consternation, understanding, and the assurance that the teachers would make a special effort to look after the kids. In the meantime, he had also learned that Feeny would be discharged home the following week, simply because there were not enough beds in hospital. At the same time, however, she would still need to sleep and rest most of the time, and ideally, the children should be out of the house for 14 days, also because of the limited immune situation of Feeny. Without being able to assess the situation himself, René discussed with the children how they should organize the next few days and then the 2 weeks. Alina immediately had the idea of moving in with her best friend and classmate for 2 weeks, if only because there was a household with 4 girls, all more or less her age, who lived on the other side of Manchester. René told Alina that he could very well imagine it, but would have to check with her parents first. "No problem," said Alina. "I'm sure they will say yes." How right she was. No sooner had René described the difficult situation they were in on the phone that his friend's compassionate mother answered, "Oh, we're used to 4, so a 5th at the table won't make much difference. When shall we pick up? And if you need help looking after Feeny or running errands, please let me know. I can help out." He had not expected such unreserved support. He didn't even know what kind of help he would need, as he hadn't asked himself the question yet. Jan also had a firm idea. He saw the opportunity to fulfill his long-cherished wish of becoming a full member of his music school, which he had previously attended as a commuter student, but which was largely made up of boarders from the adjoining residential wings, at least for those 14 days. "Dad, would you ask if I could transfer to boarding school for this time?" "I will, but I'm not sure they have any free rooms and offer such an opportunity, but I'll ask." René was more than surprised at how easily even a complex institution such as a boarding school could react to an emergency situation, and how resolutely the teaching staff and management stood behind their pupil and the family. As it was a special school for musically gifted pupils, the institution was rather like a Pippi Longstocking's Villa Kunterbund in contrast to other English schools, which seemed conservative and strict due to the school uniforms alone, but also the endless traditions and rules. There were no uniforms here. Many of the boys had longer hair than the girls, and some of the girls wore their hair in all different colors. There was a lot of hustle and bustle in the students' houses, which had a mixed layout, and the sound of either musical instruments or boisterous party guests could be heard throughout the windows all day long. The house parents who lived in each of the houses were generous. And when René told them about Jan and his mother's illness, and that the school had admitted him to boarding school for a few days, The surrogate mother took René in her arms, hugged him tightly, and made her efforts clear by letting him join the children for dinner. When he picked Jan up for the weekend, she offered René a portion of the children's dessert, which he had saved for him and which he was allowed to eat alone with her in the kitchen. She told him how well Jan had settled in during the week, getting on with his roommate and the other boys and girls. This was also reflected in the fact that Jan didn't want to go home just yet. After 2 weeks, it turned out that the doctor's advice had caused a little too much worry. Feeny had recovered quite quickly at home, so that by the end of the first week she was already longing for the children and was a little sorry that René had taken them out of the house. On the other hand, he found it helpful that the only thing was to look after Feeny and not the children as well. Apart from the errands, the visits to the waiting rooms for the medication prescriptions, the daily appointments with the outpatient nurse, the school transport for the children, and the cab services to their various commitments, such as violin and piano lessons, gymnastics, and friends, would have been almost impossible to manage. In addition, René still had to fulfill his professional obligations, even though he received no less understanding from his partner in the company and the employees. And this, despite the fact that they had not been working together for very long and were in an important phase of an early investment. René wanted Feeny to have the best possible restroom so that she could recover soon. Because as far as he had understood the oncologist during the doctor's visit, he wanted to start chemotherapy the earliest possible, regardless of the results of the operation. However, the timing of this was determined by the recovery process because the wound had to heal first due to the chemo-induced reduction in the immune system. This made sense to him, but also increased the internal pressure on him to make this recovery process as optimal as possible for Feeny. He was unable to find out what time periods played a role here, either from this doctor's consultation or from the internet or literature he had obtained. He would never have imagined how grateful he was for the offer from the mother of Alina's best friend to take over the care of Feeny. Just the fact that Feeny didn't just see René and the daily nurse, but was able to talk to a friendly mum and wife who told her about Alina, about the girls, about normal life, which obviously went on outside the hospital room in her house. It was a slice of abnormal normality, a window that opened on the days when this new friend appeared. René felt the fresh air when he came back from his errands, which he could do in the meantime, without having to worry about Feeny, who would otherwise have been alone. What's more, René was able to exchange a few words with his empathetic friend himself. She was a wonderful listener, who also had an ear for him, and to whom he could talk about his fears and worries, which he didn't yet dare to express to Feeny. Whether it was justified, function, or fear, this inner tension of wanting to function or believing he had to function without completely confiding in Feeny, as he had learned to do over the years and was used to. It made him feel a gap that he didn't even notice at first, and was therefore all the less able to deal with. He was always close to Feeny, and yet cancer interrupted that kind of proximity. And it was a feeling of double loneliness. Not being able to speak to her, or a justified, genuine concern for her, which he can share with her. When René tried to talk to her, he got the impression that Feeny had neither the ear nor the patience to listen to his concerns, and she told him that she just had to muster what little strength she had and that she had no more, because she was trying to get herself together and keep her balance. He wanted to understand, and he had to understand. He had to learn that this barbaric disease insatiably takes hold not only of Feeny, but of other victims in addition. Even so, it only directed the attack to Feeny's trade. However, he was not aware of this at the time. Instead, René groped in the unknown, following his instincts, accepting the rejection and Feeny's hints that she would have to pull all her efforts into getting back on her feet as soon as possible. "Look," she said one afternoon as he sat by her side, which he had made for her in the living room. She pushed the comforter aside. She knew that the nurse would soon be coming to reapply the bandage and which she had to be changed every day. She had already removed the bandage herself. She wanted to do this preparation because, as she thought, she could do it slowly and gently, and the bandage change would hurt her less than if the nurse, who always had to work under time pressure, tore the bandage off in one go. She looked at her husband with an expression somewhere between fear, horror, and helpless dubiousness. And he sensed from her the question of whether he could still love her, not only bear the sight of her battered body, but still find her attractive. "Look," she began again. "Here's the wound." And she lifted the comforter just a little so as not to frighten René. She didn't have the heart to show him the full wound. She felt the front of her breast open up to her pubic bone. In the mirror, she had looked at her scar, which looked like a slightly twisted zipper. And though she could feel the dissecting knives, suture threads, and blood clots that oozed pus into a bandage which had to be renewed daily. The detail René saw left him speechless. The wound seemed to be healing, but he sensed how painful it was for Feeny, not because it still hurt, but because Feeny seemed ashamed of herself and felt that her sense of self was being called into question. Without touching the wound, he reached for her arm and said into her ear how much he loved her, and that together they would want to get through this horrible wound, the difficult operation, and this illness. But words mean little, he thought. So he stayed close to her when the dressing was changed shortly afterwards, even though the nurse preferred not to have her husband present when she worked with a patient. As she left, she pressed the new prescription for bandages into René's hand, which he was to get together with some painkillers. He touched Feeny gently and tenderly on the upper part of her body, gave her a kiss, and set off to get the prescription. On the way back, he took a detour to pick up a bunch of red roses from the flower store. He wanted to show her somehow that apart from skin, sweat, and blood, there is also a scent of life that reaches beyond all this, and even if the thorns are part of the trunk. When he entered her room, René was surprised to see that she was not yet asleep, but had obviously been waiting for him. Although she couldn't take the roses, she sat up a little and wanted to smell them. So he placed them in a vase near her pillow. Feeny's gaze went over the roses to him. She seemed less insecure than she had been before, more questioning and penetrating. His gaze met hers, and he felt that they had met no less deeply than they could physically during intimate intercourse. René hoped that that they would get over this mutilation, as she was able to put it for herself the next day. Ovarian cancer, as it dawned to both for the first time, was not only life-threatening for women, It also robs a woman of their innermost being, hence of an innermost part of their relation. However, it had taken him years to realize that cancer had also affected his intestines as a partner. Even though he didn't think he would suffer the physical stigmatization as her partner, his partner. Tumors also broke out in him, the scars of which were not visible on the surface, but could be felt and felt without much effort. That's the end of subchapter 2. And if you are interested, you can listen to subchapter 3, which is called Mind the Gap, tomorrow. Thank you.